It's a topic that really ranges all over the place, from the economic impact to the social to the medical. But I want to kind of start at the beginning. Maria, you got into this as a journalist, and your approach to me was remarkably impressive because of how and why you did it. You first did a study, and the Shriver Report was a remarkable study collecting data. So instead of saying this affected my family and I just want to attack it, you first collected the data. So tell us how it came about. I mean, how did the Shriver Report come to being?
Well, it started because it did affect my family.
Right.
My father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2003, and very little was known about it. It had a huge stigma, a lot of shame. I also happened at the same time to be First Lady of California, and I was running something called the Women's Conference, and I found myself caring for my dad. I have 4 brothers, and found myself caring for my dad. My mother was also having strokes, so I started programming caregiving and Alzheimer's tracks, and they were standing room only. And I said, there's something going on with women. And when I would go and try to take my dad somewhere, I saw so many women. So I went to the Alzheimer's Association. I said, I think this disproportionately affects women. And they're like, no, we don't have any data on that.
Amazing.
And I was like, well, I do. And I said, I'm going to go out and actually report on it. And so I did. And we had started doing these Shriver reports. We had done them in partnership, the first one with the Center for American Progress, reporting on women becoming primary care women in the workplace. And then in partnership with the Alzheimer's Association, we went out and assembled an incredible group of people to report to the nation, to the president. These reports are designed to go to the president and to governors and senators about the state of our nation when it comes to Alzheimer's, and women as 2/3 of the caregivers. And so that's exactly what we did.
That's great.
Yeah, it was exciting because everybody was like, no, that's not the case. And so it was exciting to be able to say, yes, it is the case, that every 66 seconds a new brain develops Alzheimer's in this country. And as you said, 2/3 of them belong to women and 2/3 of the nation's caregivers. And nobody knows why that is. So everywhere I would go, I was like, why is that? They would like, I don't know, until I got to her. And she said, I think I know. And I'm like, we're going to work together and we're going to figure this out, because it was not because women are living longer. It's not a normal part of aging. And so there's a lot of myths that are still out there about what Alzheimer's is and isn't.
All right, Roberta, well, enlighten us. Tell us. No, we want to learn. I mean, so tell us why you think it's affecting women more than men.
So age is the greatest risk factor for developing Alzheimer's disease. Being female is another risk factor. Having the ApoE4 gene and having a mother with Alzheimer's. And that was the key. Having a mother with Alzheimer's increases the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease in both her daughters and her sons. And so it comes back to that women's biology. And what we did is really try to understand how the aging female brain was changing. And when we looked at, as Maria said, about who's developing Alzheimer's disease, let's just put a blue dot on 66% of those people who are, the blue dot people, and a green dot on the 33%. And so part of it was simple biology. It was like, well, we could actually impact the understanding about why the brain develops Alzheimer's disease if we studied the blue dot people. And it turned out that the blue dot people are women. And what we've learned is that during aging, the female undergoes a transition called the perimenopause and menopause. It's a bit like puberty. Everybody goes in and you come out differently. And for 10% of people who come through puberty, males have an increased risk of schizophrenia, females have an increased risk of depressive disorders. Women undergo a transition that's unique to the female, which is the perimenopause and menopause. And what we've learned is that the brain energy system is changing during that transition. And that turns out to be a key point of vulnerability for the brain. The brain is the most energetically demanding organ of the body. Think of it this way. From here to here, you're a Prius. From here to here, you're a Hummer. It's an energy hog. And that turns out to be a point of vulnerability. estrogen is regulating that energy system in the brain, and the loss of estrogen puts that brain at risk. Now, one of the key findings is that what we discovered is that the brain during this transition is going to a backup system. And that backup system is the same one that the brain uses if it's starving. And that turns out to be the key challenge.
And I think it's also really important for people to understand, so as women are being diagnosed at, let's say, 70 or in their late 60s or mid-60s, Alzheimer's is in your brain for 20 years before you begin to show symptoms. So back it up.
Yeah.
Back it up, 50, 45. And so one of the big things that we're trying to get out there is that women who are 45 and 50 need to be attentive to their brain health. Being perimenopausal or menopausal isn't just about losing your period or losing your mind, as kind of society likes to joke. It's actually about your brain beginning to change. That we do know. And I think people are also terrified of Alzheimer's, so they think there's nothing to do because all the publicity has been around everything that has failed. But we're trying to also change that conversation, that there are things that every single person in this room and who's watching this can do starting right now. From whether it's going online and taking a test, getting a cognitive baseline, if you're in your 20s, talking to your parents, looking at your sleep, meditation, the science behind that, growing the brain, certain brain games. We now know a lot more about that the brain continues to develop, and you can grow the brain and train the brain, right? What you eat, so much excitement and interest around what you eat and how that affects your brain, sugar, and the brain. So we're trying to, this is an awareness movement. It's to get people to get up and move, like everybody here is sitting way too long, you know, so no offense to the Herman Miller chairs, but it's part of, you know, getting people the effective exercise on the brain, getting people to actually think about that this is connected to this. And that is, you know, so in terms of like getting that message out there, it sounds simplistic, but it's not.
And it's, I mean, what's interesting is you look at diseases from heart disease and cancer, and we're making an impact.
Right.
Right. We've got treatments that are working. I can walk into a patient's room with real optimism. But Alzheimer's lagging behind. You know, it's lagging behind with public awareness and obviously research progress. Why is that?
Well, I think it's, I mean, and Roberta can address this, I think ageism is part of it, is a huge part of it. People think, even we talked about this morning, one of the panels said, well, Alzheimer's is something that happens to people in their 80s or something, so why invest in it? That's just not true. So I think there's a lot of miscommunication about the disease. People don't understand how long it's in the brain, and I try to position this as the ultimate women's empowerment movement, because if we've worked all this way, all this hard to be recognized for our brains, and we're losing them at that rate, you know, we should put our brains onto this. And I say, well, I think that, and we also, I think corporate America hasn't stepped up to this disease, much like it has in cancer and AIDS. There's nothing really sexy about Alzheimer's. There's no survivors. So I think it needs to be remarketed. We need to talk about what we can do and what we do know, not about all the trials that have failed. And I think by just talking about women's brains and looking at what we do know and focusing some of the research on that, and perhaps saying to some doctors and researchers saying, perhaps we haven't looked at it in quite the right way, let's go over here and look at the blue dots.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I like to think about it in very simple terms. It's our brains, it's our future, it's our cure. And it turns out that what we've learned about the female aging brain actually has relevance to the male brain. And to your question about why not, how many of you know the 405 freeway? Yeah, a couple, right? So there are lots of on-ramps to the 405, and that's analogous to the on-ramps to Alzheimer's disease. Not everyone develops Alzheimer's disease because of the same reason. If you've had traumatic brain injury, you're type 2 diabetic, you have risk factors that are genetic, you have, as I mentioned, a mother with Alzheimer's disease, those are different on-ramps. The problem, as you mentioned, is that there are no off-ramps. And part of that is we keep treating and we keep thinking about Alzheimer's disease relevant to its pathology. But if we go back in time, and this is where big data is absolutely so exciting, because we go back in time and we can begin to detect that, wait a minute, this person has type 2 diabetes, they've had a family member with Alzheimer's disease, and they potentially have a genetic risk factor. Now all of a sudden, we can begin to look at that individual, whether that's a woman or whether that's a man, and begin to intervene before you get on the on-ramp.
I guess what's exciting is there's no determinism. So no matter how many alleles you have of APOE4, it's not deterministic in that respect.
It is a complex set of conditions that are manifested within your biology. And I think the era of precision medicine and personalized therapeutics is so exciting because that's the way we're going to have to approach this. Clinical trials thus far have been, you have a diagnosis, everybody gets put into that diagnostic pool and now treated the same way. Whether you're a woman, whether you're a man, whether you've had the disease for 5 years, whether you've had the disease for 10 years. The brain, as Maria said, is changing. It is a dynamic organ. It is adapting. And when I think about Alzheimer's disease now, I am absolutely marvel at the adaptive changes that the brain is undergoing to try to survive this disease. What if we could take those survival mechanisms, turn it around to actually improve cognitive health? And
I think the other thing that, like Roberta's saying, is also people look at Alzheimer's and they originally think, oh, my mom or my dad is forgetting something, that's normal, they're stressed out. And it's, everybody's so busy, so people deny it. They think there's nothing to do, so they just want to leave it alone. And that very often doctors get to people who are then 80 or 70. And also the big new kind of move and wave in this is to bring people in early, to get at people to try to think, what can we do, and how we would treat Roberta would be different than how you would treat me and you. And so to really think about the different ways we talked here about personalized medicine, precision medicine. There is no one-size-fits-all with Alzheimer's, right? And the people that I think are cutting edge are looking at multiple approaches to cases, but getting people in early. If I've met, one doctor said to me when I was at an appointment with my dad, once you've seen one case of Alzheimer's, you've seen one case of Alzheimer's. That they all manifest differently. Some people go really quickly, some people are long, some people are unmanageable at home, some people need, round-the-clock care. It's really so individual. And I think also removing the guilt and the shame is a huge part of this. And also because people don't see their brains. I often say that if women saw that their brain was flabby, they'd get onto it as quickly as they'd get onto... No, seriously, because, we're spending billions of dollars to look, good, right? And we can't even see this. So I think that's part of the challenge, to get people to even think about their cognitive health.
So it's interesting, and a lot of support for disease, as you mentioned, it comes from corporations. So corporations, they can empower their employees, they can give corporate philanthropy, they can make it a movement within their company. They can add $1 onto something they sell. Right. So hopefully that will start happening to Alzheimer's. Hopefully you can get corporations to talk.
Hopefully. I'm very confident. We're starting a big event with Equinox. We went into the gyms because my idea was, let's go to places where people are thinking about their body, they're thinking about sex, they're thinking about things other than Alzheimer's, and let's talk to them about Alzheimer's in the gym. So we partnered with Equinox.
Were they resistant?
What? No, they
Not
weren't,
at all.
which was great because there were several people high up at Equinox whose parents had Alzheimer's. And they said that many of the people that came there were asking questions. Okay, I know how to do the triceps. I know what to do for my stomach. Do you have anything for my brain? So I think Equinox stepping up and doing this event, Move for Minds, with the Women's Alzheimer's Movement now in 8 cities is a big step forward. I'm trying to reach out to other companies, whether it's what makeup companies MAC did for AIDS or what Estee Lauder did for cancer. There's a great opportunity for other companies to step up and say women's brains matter. And I think if we save women's brains, we'll save men's brains, obviously, as well. But they're different, and that's okay. But I think getting companies to step forward, also getting companies who have employees who want to participate in clinical trials. I talk to people all the time who are in clinical trials and they have to take sick days and vacation time to participate. What if companies said, look, anybody who wants to participate in a clinical trial, we'll pay your time to do that. There's a lot of innovation that can happen, I think, to help people, encourage them to be part of the solution.
That's great. Roberta, we saw earlier this year some studies that came out that were controversial that pointed to potentially an association of viral infection with Alzheimer's. Do you think it's real?
So I think infection in general, kind of this low-grade inflammatory condition that can exist, for example, in persons with type 2 diabetes or people with traumatic brain injury, anything that causes this low-grade inflammation, we just made a very interesting and frightening discovery that we're working on, in which the immune cells of the immune system are actually infiltrating the brain. And so there's this low-grade inflammation that's now infiltrating into the brain, which is quite disturbing, but at the same time gives us, I think, an understanding of the complexity of the disease. And again, going back into the existing data sets, which I think is pretty exciting, and this is what Maria and I are working on, and that is, what if there's already a cure? To go back to your point about prevention, the best cure for Alzheimer's is actually prevention. What if the cure already exists for a large number of people? And we've started doing an analysis of Medicare data in which we found in a failed clinical trial that, in fact, in one of these failed Alzheimer's clinical trial, there was a responder set, and it was a response to simvastatin, a statin. We then marched up multiple data sets and ultimately into Medicare data sets and found that statins in general, not all statins, but statins are associated with a reduced risk of Alzheimer's disease in women and men of Caucasian heritage, in women of African heritage, not in men of African heritage. So that gives us a better sense of where this will work and where it won't. And it turns out that 4% of people on statins are on statins alone. 96% of people are on combination therapies. So it's not just that statin. It's in fact likely going to be a combination. And where we have the real opportunity with big data is to now go into those data sets and begin to ask, what's the right combination for the right person at the right time?
I love it. I mean, medicine has always been, looking in the middle. Now we're starting to look at the outliers. We're starting to use big data to find associations we could have never found before.
Yeah.
What I'd love to do now is to kind of turn over a little bit to the audience and get some questions for both Roberta and Maria, and to push you a little. Be provocative in what you ask. In the back there.
Maria and Roberta, my mom lived to 2 months before 100. Did the crossword puzzle almost every day, played Scrabble and played cards, smoked 3 packs of unfiltered cigarettes every day from the day she was 13, and drank Manhattans.
Oh, I love it. That might be the answer.
And while her lungs failed, her brain was sharp right up until the end. Is there any real data that mind exercises, playing games, has any real value over time, or is that a theory at this point?
So,
Go.
yeah, so yes, I know the brain is like every other organ, use it or lose it. Then there are folks like your mother who we can learn a lot from, right? So it's not only studying individuals who are at risk for the disease or who have the disease, it's also important to look at people who don't. 11% over people over the age of 65 are projected to develop Alzheimer's disease. 89% are not, right? So despite the fact that it's 11%, that's still a huge number of people that will be affected by this disease. We can learn a lot from the 89%.
I just did a big story on a company called Brain Headquarters for NBC, where I'm a reporter, and they've had incredible success. So there are some games that are effective. Most of the doctors I've spoken to say really the best thing is to try something new yourself whether it's a card game, learning cards, learning a language, learning the piano. A doctor that I visited said, do you play any musical instruments? And I said, no, I don't. He said, that's bad. Learn the piano. Learn something new. And another big thing I think that people can do today, I don't know how she lived, but isolation, depression, people being removed from society and connection, I think is also something that we as a society want to look at. I think we want to reimagine how we grow older. What are those, how do we live? Do we live isolated, alone in apartments? Do we live, playing board games with other people to keep our minds active, to keep our communication skills sharp? So I know a lot of people who swear by the games. I know a lot of people who swear by learning a musical instrument or a language, but most of all by just keeping active and learning. We're
going to see amazing data tomorrow on a video game out of UCSF and how it can affect neurocognition. Remember, every year you delay retirement, you reduce Alzheimer's by 3% in one of the largest big data studies out of Europe. Yes, the last question, and then we're unfortunately going to have to cut the session.
Hi. Any medical efficacy around the eye tracking technologies that are being used to sort of diagnose eventual memory loss, Alzheimer's, companies like NeuroTrack?
So I think there is obviously early signs of brain dysfunction, and whether that will ultimately predict Alzheimer's disease is yet to be established. But the visual system is actually a window into the brain. So it's really fantastic where people are beginning to use that window as an early detection system for potential kind of deficits in the future or currently.
And I would just add to that, people ask me all the time, like, I think I'm losing my mind. I can't find my car keys, right? This is the, big thing. Every woman I talk to is I'm losing my mind. And I think that there are all kinds of free tests. You can go online and do the SAGE test, Alzheimer's U. You can go on and take these tests. If you have a parent who's in their 60s or 70s, and you suspect anything, you can act now. Have them take one of these free tests that are online. Bring it to a neurologist. And part of also, I think, one of the things that a conference like this is so effective is that doctors need to be far more aware of what Alzheimer's is and isn't, and not just tell everybody they're under stress, but also to be aware about what's out there, talk to them about supplements, talk to them about sleep, talk to them about medication, and talk to them about stress, because it's all of these things, right? All handled together, to Roberta's point, personalized. And I think the whole, women were scared off of hormone replacement by the big federal study. I think this is a big space that will be looked at, and I think there'll be a lot of really exciting answers to come out of that.